There was something strange about that hospital ward. It wasn't the smell of the hallways, nor the muffled sound of heart monitors. It was something you couldn't see, a kind of heavy silence, as if the very air was waiting for something. That was the atmosphere Mark entered, or rather was wheeled into, unconscious, unaware, and broken in more ways than medical scans could measure. He was alive, but hollow. He hadn't spoken to God in years, and if anyone asked, he'd say he didn't miss it at all. Because when his daughter died, it felt like God died too. Mark buried his faith on the same day he buried that golden-haired little girl who used to call him hero. Since then, it didn't matter how many churches he passed by, how many Bibles sat untouched on shelves, or how many nights his wife cried into her pillow. His heart had shut down. And now, lying in a cold room with a devastating diagnosis and no hope, all he wanted was for time to pass quickly, not to live, but to end. He opened his eyes slowly that morning. The lights were dim, and the curtain between beds hadn't been drawn yet. That's when he noticed there was another man there, an older gentleman, gray hair, eyes closed, and his lips moving, silently. Mark watched. For a moment, he thought the man was hallucinating, but there was intention in those lips. He wasn't just mumbling, he was praying. With hands over his chest, the man was saying words Mark couldn't quite hear, but they disturbed him, not because they were aggressive, but because they were far too peaceful. How could someone have that kind of serenity in a place like this? What kind of person still believes prayer changes anything in such a broken world? Maybe you're watching this video right now in a moment of heavy silence. Maybe someone you love is suffering, and your faith feels like it's fading. If that's the case, write your name, or the name of someone you carry in your heart, in the comments below. If you've ever been through something similar, share your story. Let's build a chain of faith so alive that no algorithm can contain it, where every name becomes a cry, every testimony a spark of healing, and every gesture an invitation for God to visit one more hospital bed. And if this video speaks to you in any way, leave a like as an act of faith. Not for the numbers, but for souls. Your click could be the breath that carries this word to someone on the verge of giving up. And believe me, someone has already been saved by a single shared prayer. That first night, Mark closed his eyes, trying to ignore everything, but there was something about that presence beside him that wouldn't let him sleep. He tried to block it out, to rationalize, to dismiss. But the truth is, even without realizing it, his spirit had been touched, and he didn't know it yet. But it was in the silence of the other bed that something began to shift inside him, and he had no idea what was about to happen. Mark wasn't always like this. There was a time when he believed. He prayed before meals, gave thanks each morning, and when he held his daughter in his arms for the first time, he promised God he would be the best father in the world, and for years he was. She was the light of their home, the laughter in the hallway, the one who asked to pray before bed, who danced in pajamas on rainy days. And that's exactly why the blow was so brutal. A routine test, an impossible diagnosis, a battle against time that ended far too quickly. Mark watched that child wither away in just 4 months, and with every tear his wife cried, every unanswered why, he felt God drift further away, until one day he stopped asking, stopped praying, stopped believing. The pain silenced him. The rage changed him. It wasn't just grief. It was rejection of faith itself. And the more people around him spoke of purpose, divine plans, or finding meaning in the pain, the harder his heart became. If that's your God, I'll pass, he'd say. Because to him, any deity that allowed a child to suffer didn't deserve his worship, not even a second of his time. Sundays became just another day. The Bibles in the house were closed, the photos of his daughter packed away, and over time, Mark faded. There was no more light in his eyes, no plans, no strength. Just work, silence, and a kind of exhaustion even sleep couldn't fix. That was the state he was in when he arrived. At the hospital. After frequent blackouts, persistent pain, and a string of tests, the news hit like a sentence. Advanced heart failure, high risks, few guarantees. When the doctor asked if he wanted someone to come pray, Mark gave a half smile. Ironic, like someone saying, "What good did that do last time?" He refused the chaplain, refused a pastor's visit, even refused the Bible a nurse offered. He didn't want spiritual comfort. He just wanted to sleep, and if possible, not wake up. But hospitals are strange places. You go in expecting to deal only with doctors and tests, but you end up facing silences, memories, inner voices, and sometimes voices from places you can't explain. And it was between one late night and another that Mark began to hear. Faintly, almost imperceptibly, from the bed next to his, came words he didn't fully understand. A male voice, steady yet gentle, saying things like, "In you I trust. The Lord is my strength, even though I walk through the valley." It was Robert. Mark tried to ignore it, but those words seemed to stick to the walls of the room. They echoed even in silence. It was like they weren't meant for the ears, but for the soul, and that bothered him. He thought about complaining, asking to be moved to another room, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the way that man spoke. There was no desperation in his voice, no fear, just surrender, as if he had already accepted everything and yet still chose to trust. And that enraged Mark. How could someone thank God with a tube in their arm, slowly dying? How could someone still have faith at the end? And worse, why was this affecting him? By the third day, Mark decided to watch more closely. Robert wasn't a fanatic. He didn't try to convert anyone. He just prayed, sometimes with his eyes closed, other times looking out the window, and there was always a Bible on his chest, worn, full of notes, as if it had been read 1,000 times. Mark felt angry, but part of him also felt something else. Longing. A longing to believe in something, in someone. Maybe you felt that same longing too. Not for a person, but for a time when your faith was alive, when you prayed with hope, believed in the impossible, and felt God in the ordinary. If this touches you now, write the name of someone who has lost their faith, or even your own, in the comments. Share your story. It might be the spark that reignites someone else's. And if this already speaks to you, click like, as if to say, I haven't completely given up. Sometimes that's all it takes. A spark. And God does the rest. Mark still wasn't praying, but he was listening. And when the soul begins to listen, it's no longer completely closed. He thought God had vanished. Little did he know, God was right there, beside him. Mark never liked silence. After his daughter passed, he did everything he could to fill the emptiness with noise. He'd leave the TV on without watching, keep the radio blaring in the car. At work, his notifications were always active, just to drown out the sound of his own thoughts. But now, lying in a hospital bed with no control over the lights, the sounds, or the time, he found himself trapped in the one thing he avoided most: stillness. And it was in that stillness that he began to hear. At first, it was just noise, a whisper like wind sneaking through cracks. But soon he realized it had cadence, intention. It was Robert, the man in the bed beside him. He was praying, not loudly, not for attention, but consistently and with fervor, like someone who had a direct line to heaven. The words flowed as if they had lived in that chest for years. Sometimes it was just, "Thank you, Lord." Other times, "Cover us with your wings." And in the late hours of the night, full passages that Mark couldn't quite identify, but that reached too deep to ignore. And that bothered him. How could someone give thanks in the middle of pain? Praise. In between tubes, scans, and terminal diagnoses, Mark began watching Robert more discreetly. He didn't wear headphones. He wasn't reading digital devotionals. It was a real Bible, one of those old ones, that he kept on his chest like a shield. There were highlights, yellowed pages, and little notes tucked between the chapters. Sometimes Mark would fall asleep just watching him, and when he woke up hours later, Robert would still be there, eyes closed, lips moving, face at peace. Mark tried to resist. He rolled his eyes, sighed loudly, but the discomfort wasn't external. It was internal. It wasn't anger at Robert. It was envy. A quiet envy of someone who could still believe. And maybe even deeper. Longing. Longing for a time when he too prayed like that. With simple faith. With a whole heart. One night, Robert noticed Mark, watching him. He opened his eyes, gave a soft smile, and asked, "May I pray for you tonight?" Mark hesitated, didn't know whether to laugh or scream. He just responded, bluntly, "Do whatever you want." Robert closed his eyes again and began. He didn't mention Mark's name, didn't talk about illness. He just gave thanks. Thanked God for being alive, for the gift of one more day, for the presence of a brother beside him. Mark turned, his face away, not knowing what to do with that. It was too uncomfortable, too intense, too real. And that was when everything began to change. Because deep down, Mark knew. That prayer wasn't just for Robert, it was also for him. And no matter how much he resisted, part of him was listening, part of him was remembering. Maybe right now someone around you is praying for you, even if you don't know it. Maybe this video is that silent prayer, crossing barriers you didn't even know existed. If this story is stirring something inside of you, write in the comments the name of someone you carry in your heart, someone who needs to find faith again. And if that someone is you, write it too. Let's build a space where no one prays alone, where every name is seen by heaven. And if you already feel something moving in you, click like. That small gesture may carry this message to the Mark in another room, another home, another life. Mark still couldn't explain it. But something in him was changing. Not because of sermons or videos or spectacular miracles, but because of an ordinary man who prayed quietly in the bed beside him. Mark closed his eyes trying to forget, but those words seemed to pierce straight through the wall he had built around his heart. It was around 3 in the morning when Mark woke up with a tightness in his chest. It wasn't physical pain. It was the kind that builds up slowly. Memories, regrets, absences. The IV dripped in rhythm with his thoughts, and he couldn't escape them anymore. He tried to stay still, hold his breath, pretend that time wasn't moving. But the longing for his daughter hit him in a new way. He remembered the last time he saw her sleeping, not in a hospital, but at home, with a children's book resting on her chest and a flashlight still on. She loved reading before bed, said it was how angels talked to her. Mark turned his face toward the wall, shut his eyes tight, and tried to swallow the tears, but he couldn't. For the first time in years, he cried, truly cried. It wasn't loud. It was more like a deep, internal sob, as if his spirit was cracking open from the inside, breaking through a shell it had taken years to form. And then, between one tear and the next, he heard it. At first, he thought it was his imagination, a hallucination from exhaustion. But the voice was there. Not loud, not a whisper. It was clear, steady, deep. A declaration that seemed to come from beyond the room, as if it wasn't meant for ears but for the soul. You turned my mourning into dancing. You removed my sackcloth and clothed me with joy. Mark didn't understand right away, but those words hit him, as if they were meant for him, as if they knew exactly where it hurt. He sat up in bed, wiped his eyes, and stayed still. The room was dim, and Robert in the bed beside him had his Bible open on his chest. From where he was, Mark couldn't read the page, but the words echoed, over and over, as if they had been placed there in that moment. For a man who had stopped believing, he stayed awake the rest of the night, couldn't sleep. but he also didn't feel the same weight as before. It was as if something inside was slowly shifting. It wasn't faith yet, but it wasn't disbelief anymore either. It was a new territory, a middle ground where questions were allowed to breathe. In the morning, a nurse came in to check his vitals. She smiled and asked, "Did you sleep a little better last night?" He didn't answer. He just looked at Robert, still sleeping with the Bible on his chest. Same open page, same peace on his face. And then, for the first time since his daughter's funeral, Mark did something he hadn't done in years. He gave thanks, not out loud, not with eloquent words, but in thought. A quiet thank you whispered toward heaven, even without knowing if anyone was listening. Maybe you're in that same space right now, somewhere between pain and possibility, between loss and the chance to start again. If that's you, don't ignore what you're feeling. Don't silence what still stirs within. Write the name of someone who needs hope in the comments. Maybe that someone is you. Say what you've lost, or what remains after the pain. Sometimes, just exposing the soul is the first step to letting it breathe again. And if something in you has moved during this story, click like. That small act could carry this message to someone who cried in secret tonight, just like Mark. The day went on, but those words never left his mind. They were unlike anything he'd read or heard before. They tasted like a promise, and a question started to grow inside him, quiet, persistent, and almost uncomfortable. Where did that phrase come from? He didn't know yet that those words came straight from a psalm, but his spirit already recognized them. The next morning, Mark woke up earlier than usual. The room was still dim, and the machines hummed softly. Out of instinct, he looked to the side, and there was Robert, lying still, eyes closed, breathing calmly. The Bible was still there, open on his chest, the same page as the night before, the same silent presence that seemed to carry something bigger than words. Mark hesitated, but something within him nudged him forward. Carefully, he stood up, wheeled his IV pole, and took 2 steps toward the next bed. He paused beside it and just stood there. It felt like standing in front of a living sanctuary. Nothing about it seemed ordinary. With trembling hands, he leaned forward and looked at the open page. His eyes searched eagerly until he found it. The line, the one from the night before. "You turned my mourning into dancing. You removed my sackcloth and clothed me with joy." Psalm 30. Mark stepped back slightly, as if that revelation had struck something deep inside him. He read the rest of the psalm with tear-filled eyes. With each line, it felt like he was reading his own story, as if someone had written those words, knowing exactly what he had been through. "Lord, you brought me up from the grave. Your anger lasts only a moment. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning." He returned to his bed in silence, didn't say a word, didn't mention it to the nurses. But inside, something had realigned. That wasn't just an ancient text. It was a message, a bridge, a reunion with something he thought he had lost forever. The possibility of believing again. Later that same day, a hospital chaplain walked into the room holding a small notebook. It was part of protocol, brief visits to offer prayer to patients. She approached Mark's bed and asked gently, "Would you like me to pray for you?" He nodded. But before she could begin, he said, "You can, but only if you use Psalm 30. She smiled, surprised. "Of course, that's one of my favorites." And there, in that room where faith had seemed dead for so long, a prayer was offered. And this time, it wasn't for someone. It was with someone. If you've made it this far and felt something shift inside you, know this. Psalm 30 can also be your turning point. It's not just a poem. It's a testimony, a prophetic announcement that mourning doesn't last forever, that the garments of grief can be exchanged, that joy, even wounded, can return. Write in the comments the name of someone you want to include in this prayer, a child, a friend, or maybe yourself. Say that you accept this dance, even after the sorrow. And if this touched your heart, like this video as an act of faith. A small gesture that says, "I still believe morning will come." Mark would never forget that moment. Not because something spectacular happened, but because for the first time in years something happened inside him. And that changes everything. He had lost faith in the God who heals, until he met the God who resurrects the soul. Robert didn't wake up that morning. The nurses did everything they could, but his heart simply stopped. He left in peace, with the Bible still resting on his chest and his face serene, like someone who had already said goodbye long before death arrived. Mark watched everything from his bed, in complete silence. For the first time in a long while, he felt a strange kind of grief. Not for a man he barely knew, but for someone who had done so much for him without ever asking for anything in return. It felt like losing a newly discovered bridge, a quiet presence that, without trying, had brought meaning back to his room and to his life. Hours later, as a hospital worker organized Robert's belongings, something fell from the pillow. A simple envelope with Mark written in neat handwriting on the front. He hesitated before opening it. His hands trembled, and his heart pounded, as if it already knew something sacred was about to be revealed. "Mark, you never told me your name, but I knew. God told me. Every day, while you slept, or pretended to, I prayed for you. Not because I'm better, but because someone once prayed for me. I know what it's like to lose your faith, to scream at God and hear nothing back, but I've learned that sometimes He answers from the bed beside yours. You don't have to understand now. Just remember, while you were resisting, someone was interceding, and God, He heard." Mark closed his eyes, and he wept. But this time, it wasn't pain. It was something deeper. A kind of cleansing from the inside out, as if mourning had finally been replaced by something new. Without saying a word, he reached for the nightstand, grabbed the Bible he had refused days earlier, and placed it on his chest. Just like Robert used to do. Maybe you're watching this right now thinking no one is praying for you, that no one cares, that God is silent. But what if someone is praying for you at this very moment? What if this video is the quiet way heaven chose to reach you? If you believe this message carries purpose, write in the comments the name of someone who needs this prayer, someone who might not even know they're being carried, someone who has stopped believing. And if that someone is you, don't hesitate. Write your name here. Let's form an invisible network of intercessors, because sometimes the prayer that changes everything isn't the one you say. It's the one someone says for you. And if this story spoke to your soul, click like, not just to support, but as a sign, a signal of faith to heaven and to other hearts that are on the edge of finding their way back to God. Your small gesture may be the answer to someone else's silent prayer. Mark was discharged 2 weeks later. The doctors remained cautious, but something in him had undeniably changed. His wife came to pick him up in the lobby. He embraced her tightly, as if apologizing with his entire body. And before leaving the hospital, he did something that surprised even the staff. He donated a brand new Bible to the chapel. Inside the cover, he wrote only one sentence. "For anyone who thinks no one is praying for you, someone is. I know that for a fact." Mark. Some prayers are never heard by the one who says them, but they're answered by the one who needed them most. If you've made it this far, know this. This story isn't just about Mark. It's about everyone who at some point lost their faith, and without even realizing it, was reached by a silent prayer, a presence beside them, a word that seemed forgotten, yet was planted at exactly the right moment. Now, if you can, take a deep breath, close your eyes, place your hand over your heart, and listen. Psalm 30. I will exalt you, Lord, for you lifted me out of the depths and did not let my enemies gloat over me. Lord my God, I called to you for help and you healed me. You, Lord, brought me up from the realm of the dead. You spared me from going down to the pit. Sing the praises of the Lord, you his faithful people. Praise his holy name. For his anger lasts only a moment, but his favor lasts a lifetime. Weeping may stay for the night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. You turned my mourning into dancing. You removed my sackcloth and clothed me with joy, that my heart may sing your praises and not be silent. Lord my God, I will praise you forever. This is your prayer today. This is your promise. God still turns mourning into dancing. He still heals tired souls. He still answers, in silence and in signs. And he may be using this video as his answer for someone you love. So write in the comments the name of someone who needs to experience this miracle. And if it's you, declare, "This promise is mine." Like this video as someone planting a seed of faith. Share it with someone who's in bed at home or stuck between exhaustion and hope. Because maybe someone is about to be touched by the prayer you didn't even know you were making. And in the next video, you'll meet the woman who whispered a psalm before dying and came back to life seconds later.